Winter had settled over the Wyoming plains like a great white hush, soft, merciless, and listening. Most folks hated this kind of cold, the kind that crept under doors, under coats, under skin, the kind that made a man think about everything he wished he'd forgotten. But for Elias Mercer, the quiet of winter was the only season that didn't lie. Snow told the truth. It revealed every track, every broken branch, every sign a man tried to hide. Tonight, though, the truth came for him in ways he hadn't expected. The wind cut sideways across the empty stretch of prairie, spitting snow that stung like grit. Elias nudged his horse along the narrow ridge, the animal snorting steam into the dusk. He'd been tracking a lost calf, one that had wandered off from its mother 2 nights before. But with the storm rolling in, he knew he was out of time. He tugged his scarf tighter. "We're turning back," he muttered to the mare. His voice came out rough, swallowed by the cold. He reined left. That's when he saw it, a smear of movement in the white. At first he thought it was the wind shifting powder across the ground. Then he leaned forward, squinting past the drifting flurries. Something, someone, was collapsed in the snow. Elias dismounted in a heartbeat, boots punching through the crusted frost. The blast of cold hit his legs, bitter and sharp, but he pushed faster. His breath plumed from his mouth in harsh clouds. The body lay twisted, half buried by blown drifts. A coat frozen stiff, a hat lost somewhere behind, a rifle sticking out of the snow like a gravestone. Elias dropped to his knees beside him. A man, young, maybe 30, skin pale from cold, lips cracked and blue, face slack with the first hints of frostbite. Snow clung to his lashes like tiny glass beads. Elias pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck. A faint pulse, thin as a whisper. "Hell," Elias breathed. "You held on longer than you had any right to." He looked around. Nothing but white, stretching to the ends of everything. Whoever this man was, he hadn't been alone long, but he wouldn't survive another hour out here. Elias scooped his arms beneath him, braced his legs, and lifted with a low grunt. The man was heavy with ice, dead weight, and half-frozen clothes dragging like anchors. Elias managed to drape him over the saddle, tying him secure with rawhide strips. Storm clouds rolled in darker above them. There wasn't time to think. He mounted behind the stranger, wrapped one arm tight around the man's chest to keep him steady, and spurred the mare hard toward the homestead. Snow clawed across his face. Wind knifed through his coat. The trail blurred into pale ghosts. But the ranch lantern, hanging outside the door, flickered faintly in the distance, a tiny glow trembling in the storm. By the time Elias reached the porch, the stranger's body was cold as river stones. He kicked the door open with his shoulder. Warmth, thin, but real, spilled out, touching his face. A fire crackled low in the hearth. 2 small figures jerked their heads up from near the stove. Mara and Jonah, his kids, the ones he'd been raising alone for nearly 4 years now, since the sickness, since the winter that had taken their mother and left Elias with a house too quiet and 2 children who grew up faster than any child should. Mara, 7, stood first. Dark-eyed, sharp, too observant for her age. Jonah, 5, peered from behind her, face smudged with ash from helping stoke the fire. Mara's gaze went to the body slumped in Elias's arms. "Pa?" she whispered. "Clear the table," Elias said quietly. "Both of you. Quick now." They scrambled without question. Chairs scraped, pots shifted. Jonah shoved aside a wooden toy horse. Hands trembling. Elias laid the stranger down flat, snow melting off him in wet patches. Mara fetched blankets before he asked. Jonah poured water from the kettle into a tin bowl, careful not to spill. Elias stripped the frozen coat off the man, working fast. Steam curled up from his thawing shirt. His chest barely rose. Mara tugged Elias's sleeve. "Is he gonna die?" Elias paused. A long breath fogged the air between them. "Not if we can help it." A crack of thunder rolled in the distance, trembling the window glass. He slid his hands beneath the stranger's jaw, tilting his head to check his airway. Frost lined the corners of his lips. His breath was ragged, almost non-existent. Elias pressed 2 fingers to the man's throat again. The pulse was weaker now, damn near gone. "Jonah," Elias said. "More blankets." The boy ran. Elias leaned close, listening for breath. His own heartbeat thudded loud in his ears. The fire popped behind him. Snow hammered the roof. Mara stood frozen near the table, eyes wide, voice small. "Pa, who is he?" Elias shook his head. "I don't know." The stranger's eyelids fluttered, just barely. Snowmelt streaked down his temples. His lips moved, slow, trembling, but no sound came out. Elias bent lower. The man tried again. A whisper formed, thin as the winter wind. "Please." His body seized with a tremor, then went limp again. Jonah came running back with another load of blankets, nearly tripping over his own feet. Elias wrapped the man tight, arms, chest, legs, trying to trap whatever heat he could. "Pa," Mara said softly, "we found him. But what if someone else was supposed to?" Elias didn't look up. Snow pounded harder against the windows. The stranger's hand twitched once, barely, and then stilled. Fingers curled like they were gripping something far away. Elias swallowed. "Sometimes," he said, voice low, steady, "God puts people in the snow for a reason." Outside, the wind roared like something hungry. Inside, beside the trembling fire, a family waited for a stranger to decide whether he would keep breathing. And the storm kept coming. The stranger's breath came in fits, shallow, like someone learning to breathe again. Elias bent his head close, tasting the iron of blood and wet wool, and for a long time he simply listened. The house hummed with small sounds, the kettle's thin cry, the scrape of Mara's boot against a floorboard, the pop of a thawing ember. Jonah held a rag in careful fingers, eyes wide as if he were looking at a ghost. He had never seen anyone but their pa fall asleep and wake, and this man who lay on their table was not yet wholly dead, nor yet fully alive. Elias worked without fuss. He cut the man's sleeve open, found a shallow wound below the ribs, blood already crusted black where snow had pressed into it. A clean blade, a strip of linen, and a slow, private stitch. He did it the way his own hands had learned to mend fences and freeze water pipes, enough to hold. He did not look for miracles. He asked for staying. Mara moved like someone older when she lifted the ladle. She fed the stranger a spoonful of warm broth, watching his jaw for any sign that he would reject it. The man swallowed as if he'd been taught how to do it again. His throat made a small sound, an animal sound, and then his eyes, gray and wet, opened a crack. Light spilled over them. For a moment they were not his. They were snow-bleached horizons, a ridge of something far off. He blinked and thought of horses, or of another man's gravestone. He didn't know which. "Easy," Elias said. He kept his voice flat and small, like someone who had seen too many sudden ends to waste breath on panic. "You're here. You're inside. You're gonna be all right." The man's lips formed the syllable of a name, but it came out like a frightened animal. "Cole," he whispered. Not full, not clear, but a name nonetheless. Mara's eyes flicked to Elias. Jonah, a small gasp. Names were rope into the world. Once you had one, you could anchor a person. Elias moved a step back and let him breathe. The stranger's fingers twitched, curling unconsciously around a scrap of cloth. When Elias straightened, he noticed what had been clutched, an old, folded photograph, paper-browned and hard from cold, edges soft with use. The man's thumb had kept it from dissolving in the snow. Elias eased it from the stranger's grasp and unfolded it slowly. A woman's face looked up at him, young, soft, and fierce. A child perched on her knee, blinking like a small sun. The back of the photo had a scrawl, almost illegible from wet. "For Sarah, come home. See." Elias felt the shift then, the small, sharp realization that this man was not accidental detritus left by the storm. He had been carrying pieces of life with him. He had been trying somehow to get home. "Cole?" Mara asked, the name a fragile thread she held between two careful hands. The stranger blinked once, then twice. Recognition mustered like muscle. Cole Hart, he said, the name tasting like blood and iron. Cowboy, rode with the Hart outfit. The words were low, but they came easier, as if defenses were still warming up with the man. Jonah stepped closer, curiosity brighter than fear. He reached out a finger and pressed it against Cole's gloved knuckle. The man's eyes warmed the faintest degree. "Got a ma?" Jonah asked, direct as always. Cole's jaw worked. He looked at the photograph and then at the small boy with the ash thumb. Something in his chest, something older than the cold, buckled. A single rusty laugh escaped him, more a release than happiness. "Ain't mine," he said. "Sarah's, I was supposed to meet her, supposed to be gone a week, lost the trail, thought I could make it, got caught." Mara sat down on the floor beside the hearth, boots tucked under, and watched like someone at the edge of a dream. Snow pressed its white face against the windows, and the house closed itself around the three of them. A man who'd been alone since sickness, and two small lives who had learned how to stack days into something survivable. Elias watched Cole with an appraising calm. There was a hardness to the man, worn leather around the mouth, a set to the jaw that told Elias the man had been through storms other than weather. But there was also the smell of the saddle on him, the old tang of horse and distant fires, and something in his hands that knew ropes and knots. Elias's world had space for another set of hands. "We'll get you warm," Elias said. "You'll rest. If you can talk later, you can tell me whatever you need me to know." Cole's eyes closed then, and he fell back into a sleep that was more fragile rest than slumber. Elias covered him with another blanket, tucking it up under the chin like a father. The house exhaled, and for a while the storm's noise became little more than an exoskeleton around the room. That night, when the lamp burned low and the children dreamed of sleds and distant sleigh bells, Elias sat by the window and stared at the dark. The photograph lay on his knee, Sarah's smile a quiet accusation and promise all at once. He thought of the widow's ledger, of names, dates, the small obligations life left behind when the moon rose too cold and too soon. He thought of promises he had nearly forgotten, like tools rusting when unused. Cole had been brought through his door by happenstance, and by a choice Elias could not pretend there hadn't been a decision in the act of stopping for a collapsed man. The decision sat between his ribs now, a steady weight. Outside, the wind argued with the eaves. Inside, the house was a small universe where warmth moved in measured pulses. Mara's small breath was the clock. Jonah's soft mutterings in sleep were punctuation. Elias didn't sleep that night. He sat and watched the stranger sleep and wondered at the math of it, how one man's misstep might become another family's entire future. He thought of how quickly a child could name a stranger father if the stranger only stayed long enough to learn the roots of a hearth. Around dawn, Cole woke. He was pale but steadier. He tried to lift himself and winced, hand flattening to the table. Elias offered a cup, and when Cole took it his fingers shook but did not drop it. "Server?" Cole asked, clearing his throat. "No," Elias said. "You're safe, for now." Cole blinked and let out a long breath that tasted like surrender and relief. Jonah shuffled in then, wrapped in a blanket, face pressed to his pa's shoulder. "Pa," he said in a whisper, "do you think he'll stay?" Elias looked down at the boy. He wanted to answer truthful, which in their line of work meant answering with actions more than words. He reached for the photograph and slipped it back into Cole's hand. "Let him tell us," he said. "We'll listen." Cole closed his fingers around the small scrap, as if around the last safe thing he had. In his face sagged a tired gratitude that had no language but its own. Outside the snow eased, less furious now, more a hush of falling silver. The next blizzard might come in a week, a month. The next decision would come sooner. They ate cold bread and warmed stew. A small dog from next door, thin and brave, watched from the porch and then curled up by the stove when Jonah let it in. The ordinary made itself present. Plates, a shared towel, the small barter of chores. Cole's voice came at last, slow and careful as a man learning to speak after being underwater. He began simply, with a story that smelled of open ranges and a woman called Sarah. A story that would fold into the shape of the house, and perhaps, if time allowed, into the shape of the children's future. And while he talked, Elias listened, the way people listen when the world is cold and they can afford to be kind, with an attention that keeps the snow from stealing what matters next. Winter sharpened in the days that followed, the kind of cold that didn't just settle outside the walls. It learned the creaks in the floorboards, the weak spots in a man's bones. Snow stacked high against the windows, soft as wool from afar, but heavy enough to swallow a horse whole. Inside the Mercer homestead, warmth clung to the rooms like something earned. Cole mended slowly. His strength returned in small pieces, one morning breath at a time, one steady meal, one clear sentence. Jonah followed him like a small shadow, inspecting every wince, every cough, every attempt Cole made to sit up without help. Mara watched more quietly, though her eyes tracked everything. His hands, the scars near his knuckles, the way he paused when wind brushed along the chimney. Elias noticed it too. A man didn't learn how to sit that still unless he'd spent years listening for danger. On the third morning, Cole finally pushed himself upright in the bed they'd made near the stove. His breath came easier now, his skin had regained warmth, and for the first time, he stayed awake long enough to look around the house, really look. He studied the faded quilt, the small boots set neatly in the corner, the patched curtains Mara had sewn, the wooden horse Jonah had carved, and the way everything felt lived in, but quiet, as if joy had once lived here with full arms, and then left behind only the echo. Elias poured him coffee, or the closest thing they had left after rationing. The steam lifted slow, curling upward like a question. Cole accepted it with both hands. "Storm's easing," Elias said, leaning against the counter. "Might have a clear stretch come morning." Cole nodded. "Looks that way." Jonah, who had been pretending to stack kindling, turned sharply. "But not clear enough for you to leave," he said, too quick. Too hopeful to hide. Cole's eyes softened, the first true warmth Elias had seen from him. "We'll see," Cole murmured. He didn't mean it to wound, but the sentence hung in the room like a draft. Mara's eyes flicked toward the window. Jonah's shoulders sagged. Elias stepped in with the kind of calm he'd learned only after losing someone too early. "You're still healing," he said. "No one's sending you back into that cold." Cole nodded gratefully. But something settled in him then, an old sense of duty, worn and familiar. He was a man with a direction, with a place he'd been riding toward before the snow had taken him down, and whatever waited beyond the ridge hadn't stopped waiting. He drank the coffee slowly, staring into the cup as if the dark surface could show him a path through the storm. When he spoke again, it was quieter. "I was riding to Rawlings," he said. "Sarah's sister was waiting there. A safe house of sorts. Sarah passed a year ago. Fever." He touched the photograph in his pocket. "I promised her I'd bring her boy to family." Mara looked up. "Where's the boy now?" Cole exhaled. "Gone," he whispered. "Train robbery in autumn. Bandits took everything. I got thrown from the coach. When I woke, he was gone." The silence that followed was different this time, sharp, unblinking. Jonah moved closer to Cole, tiny fingers brushing the worn sleeve of his coat. "I'm sorry," the boy said simply. Cole swallowed, eyes burning with a grief that needed no explanation. "He was only 4, he said. "Name was Rowan, kind-hearted, always humming something." Cole's voice cracked. "He shouldn't be out there." Elias felt something shift under his ribs. Pain recognized pain. Loss recognized loss. Outside, the wind scraped frost across the shutters. Inside, the fire dimmed to coals. Cole set the cup down carefully. "I was heading east when the storm took me. Tried to cut across open ground. Bad call." He rubbed the back of his neck once. "Didn't think I'd wake up again." "You did," Elias said. "And you're here now." Cole nodded, though he didn't look comforted by the truth. "I'm grateful," he said, voice thick. "More than I can say." Mara rose from her spot and stepped toward him, small, solemn, sure. She placed a folded blanket on his lap. "My mom made that one," she said, "before she got sick." Cole brushed a hand across the fabric. "It's beautiful." "She'd be glad someone warm was using it?" Elias watched his daughter, something quiet and unfamiliar blooming in his chest. Mara was careful with her words, careful with her heart too. The fact she'd offered something of her mother, that was no small thing. Later that afternoon, Cole insisted on standing. Elias told him he wasn't ready. Cole insisted anyway. He braced himself against the edge of the table, breath shaking, and pushed to his feet. His legs trembled like saplings in wind. Jonah darted forward with both hands outstretched. "I got you." Cole managed a thin laugh and rested a hand on the boy's head. "I see that." He took 2 steps, then 3. On the 4th, his knee buckled, but Elias's arm was already there, steady and solid. Cole exhaled, embarrassed. "Storm knocked me clean out of myself." Elias shook his head. "You'll get it back." When Cole eased himself into the chair by the fire, Mara wordlessly tucked the blanket tighter around his legs. Jonah pushed a mug of warm broth into his hands. Cole blinked, stunned by the simple kindnesses. "You Mercer folks," he murmured, voice thick. "You save a man without asking who he was." Elias met his gaze. "Everybody's someone before the cold gets to 'em." The words settled between them like embers, quiet but burning. Later, as the storm thinned to a hush and the night pressed its cold cheek against the windows, Elias stepped outside onto the porch. Snow glittered under the moonlight. The world looked washed clean, though he knew better. He heard the door creak behind him. Cole stood there, leaning heavy on the frame, blanket around his shoulders. "You shouldn't be up," Elias said. "Couldn't sleep," Cole answered. "Mine's too loud." Elias nodded. "Storm does that." Cole stared out at the untouched snow stretching to the dark tree line. "Your kids," he said quietly. "They're good souls." "They're strong," Elias corrected. "World made them that way." Cole's breath fogged the night air. A man could get used to a place like this. Elias didn't move, but Cole's next words drifted out like a truth he hadn't meant to speak aloud. A man could stay. The wind exhaled around them. Elias didn't answer, not yet. The cold carried too much honesty in it for quick promises. Inside, 2 children slept under quilts stitched with memory. Inside, a stranger was becoming something else. Outside, winter waited to see what shape their lives would take next. By the 5th morning, the storm had broken into a glass-blue quiet, the kind of calm that winter gave only after it had taken something. Icicles hung thick from the edge of the roof, dripping slowly, each drop a silver heartbeat in the cold air. Cole could stand now without help. He moved carefully, the blanket still slung over his shoulders, each step a reminder of what he'd come through and what he'd nearly lost. Mara watched him from the table, where she sorted dried beans into neat little piles, each pile its own small ritual. Jonah followed behind her, hopping from tile to tile as if stepping on cracks would let winter swallow him whole. Elias was loading wood by the shed, breath rising in white plumes. Cole stepped outside, boots crunching softly across the frozen earth. The sky above them was pale, a thin wash of morning light spread across drifting cloud. Cole stood beside Elias a long moment, watching how the man worked, slow, steady, like someone who had learned to build a world from pieces too small for anyone else to notice. "You got a strong place here," Cole said quietly. Elias nodded without turning. "Been holding together far as it can." Cole dug his hands deeper into the blanket, his fingers still stiff, the cold stitched into them. "You asked me before," Cole murmured, "to tell you anything you needed to know." Elias finally looked up, his eyes gray like old river stone. "I ain't a man with much good behind me," Cole began. "I rode with a cattle outfit, worked long trails, lost men, lost horses. Lost—" He stopped. The words were hard. "Lost Sarah to fever. Lost her boy to the kind of evil that travels easy." Elias remained silent. Cole swallowed. But I ain't running from anything law-bound, just sorrow. And winter caught me the same way it catches anyone carrying more than their weight. Elias studied him, jaw flicking once. You looking to keep on east? Cole hesitated. It was the plan, he said. Before the snow. Before. His gaze drifted toward the house, toward the window where Jonah pressed his small nose against the glass to see if the grown men were talking about something important. Elias followed Cole's gaze. You fit in easy here, Elias said simply. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't invitation. It was just a thing that was true. Cole exhaled, the breath fogging in front of him. I know, and that's what scares me. Elias tossed the last piece of firewood into the pile and leaned both hands on the handle of the axe. Scares you how? Feels too much like home, Cole whispered. Feels like something I shouldn't reach for. Elias nodded once, as if the words were ones he knew. Losing a home'll teach you that. His voice softened. Finding one again'll test if you learned wrong. Cole's jaw clenched. A small, broken laugh escaped him. You speak like a preacher. I speak like a widower, Elias corrected. The truth settled in the frost. Cole looked away, blinking hard as if to push something down. Your kids. They're good. They remind me of Rowan. His voice caught. I can't replace him. I can't replace anyone. No one asked you to, Elias said. Cole's breath shivered in his chest. Then what do you think they're hoping for? Elias didn't answer. Not immediately. He stepped toward the house, opened the door halfway, letting the warm air spill out over them. Mara was sweeping the floor with a broom 3 sizes too big. Jonah was trying to help her and mostly making it worse. They looked up, smiling. 2 sparks in winter's long night. Elias stepped aside. Come inside, he murmured. Cole followed. The warmth touched him gently. Mara handed him a cup of warm milk without a word. Jonah thrust a wooden horse into his hand, like an offering. You can have it, Jonah announced. I made it for someone brave, but then I met you. Cole nearly choked on the breath he took. Mara tugged his sleeve. You don't have to be scared of staying, she said. Pa knows how to fix what breaks. Elias gave her a look, but his eyes softened. Mara always saw more than she told. Cole sat slowly. The wooden horse felt warm in his palm. Simple, crooked-legged, real. He stared into the fire, letting the heat sink into his bones. He thought of the trail east, long, barren, lonely as the inside of a coffin. He thought of winter's teeth. He thought of Rowan's voice humming some small forgotten tune. He thought of Sarah's last words to him. Find him a place where the world is kind. He closed his eyes. Mara and Jonah's laughter filled the room. Elias's footsteps measured the floor. The fire sighed. When Cole opened his eyes again, something inside him had settled. Not fully healed, not fully whole, but settled. He stood. Elias looked up, waiting. Cole set the wooden horse on the table, ran a thumb over the rough-carved mane. If you'll have me, he said. If it don't trouble you too much, I'd like to stay, least through winter. Mara beamed. Jonah threw both hands up. I knew it. Elias didn't smile right away. He walked closer, studying Cole's face with the serious calm of a man who'd had every illusion stripped from him. When he finally spoke, it was quiet as snow landing on a shutter. You stay 1 season, he said. You'll stay longer. Cole nodded once, a vow forming gently on his tongue. Then I'll stay longer. Elias extended his hand, a simple gesture, but one that carried the weight of years. Cole took it. Their handshake wasn't brief, it wasn't stiff. It was the kind of grip that said 2 men understood what it meant to carry a family through winter. Jonah ran circles around them, shouting something unintelligible. Mara leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, pretending to be older than she was, but unable to hide the quiet glow in her eyes. Pa? She asked softly. Does this mean we're 4 now? Elias looked at Cole. Cole cleared his throat, voice thick. If you want me to be. Mara nodded firmly. Jonah wrapped his arms around Cole's leg, face pressed against the worn fabric. We saved you, he said. Now you stay with us. Cole knelt, and pulled the boy into a real embrace, one he hadn't given in too long. Outside, the last of the snow began to fall in slow silver curtains, gentle now, like blessing rather than threat. Inside, a cowboy who'd lost everything found a chair by a warm fire, a cup set for him, a place where laughter waited to stitch itself into his ribs. Winter was still long. There'd be frozen mornings, broken fences, hunger seasons, and storms that howled like memories. But come what may, the Mercer house no longer held 3 hearts. It held 4. A stranger, saved from the snow, becoming the father 2 children never expected, and the man Elias Mercer never realized he'd been waiting to welcome home.